The obese virgin girl was sold for pennies until the prince said, "You're coming with me." Dust swirls in a crowded marketplace. A heavy gavel slams. The crowd jeers as a trembling young woman is pushed onto the block, mocked, humiliated. Price lower than a pig. Then hoofbeats thunder. A purse of gold crashes to the ground, and a cloaked man's voice cuts through the chaos. She comes with me, but this is no rescue story. Because what waits beyond the palace gates is far more dangerous than the auction block. Whispers turn to outrage. Nobles plot her downfall, and a cruel secret from her past threatens to tear her away forever. She carries a hidden truth that could change the kingdom itself, but only if love proves stronger than shame. God, will she rise from scorned servant to beloved bride, or be cast aside as nothing more than the girl sold for pennies? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The spring morning dawned cold and gray over the town square, where vendors' cries mixed with the squeal of pigs and the general bustle of market day. Margaret Holly, known to most as Meg, stumbled as her stepbrother Richard roughly dragged her through the gathering crowd. Her worn brown dress caught on the cobblestones, but she managed to keep her footing, holding her head high despite the shame burning in her cheeks. Here now. Richard's voice rang out across the square. A healthy woman for sale. Payment for honest debts. His fingers dug painfully into Meg's arm as he yanked her onto the wooden auction platform. Meg's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand straight, though her plump figure and plain features drew immediate jeers from the gathering crowd. She fixed her eyes on the distant church spire, trying to shut out the cruel voices rising around her. Too fat for honest work, someone called out. Aye, and probably spoiled goods besides. Another voice added with a crude laugh. Virgin or not, who'd want such a plain thing? A woman's voice this time, sharp with mockery. The auctioneer, a thin man with tobacco-stained teeth, banged his gavel for attention. Now then, who'll start the bidding for this fine, healthy specimen? Silence fell. Meg could feel the weight of judging eyes upon her, could sense the smirks and sideways glances. Her fingers found the small wooden cross hanging at her neck, and her lips moved in silent prayer. She would not cry. She would not give them that. Satisfaction. 1 penny, called out a voice from the back. 2 pennies. Countered another, followed by raucous laughter. The town butcher, his bloody apron marking him clearly in the crowd, raised a lazy hand. 3 pennies, though that's more than she's worth. Meg's stepbrother Richard shifted impatiently beside her, his face darkening with anger at the low bids. Come now. She's worth more than that. Strong back, knows her letters, can cook, and clean. 4 pennies, someone called up mockingly. 5, answered another. The auctioneer looked around the crowd with desperate enthusiasm. 5 pennies? Do I hear 6? 5 pennies going once, ... Meg's prayer grew more fervent, though she kept her face carefully blank. Lord, give me strength. Let me endure this with dignity. 5 pennies going twice, ... The auctioneer raised his gavel, and Meg's heart sank. This was to be her fate then, sold for less than the price of a good loaf of bread. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His plain traveling cloak concealed his features, but his bearing commanded immediate attention. Without a word, he tossed a heavy purse onto the auctioneer's podium. The sound of clinking gold made the crowd gasp. She comes with me, the stranger announced. His voice clear and authoritative, the auctioneer scrambled to open the purse, his eyes widening at the sight of the gold within. Sold. To the gentleman in the... But a sudden hush had fallen over the crowd. The stranger had pushed back his hood, revealing a face known to all, the strong, noble features of Prince Alaric himself. Whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople like wind through wheat. The prince. Prince Alaric. What's he doing here? Richard's grip on Meg's arm went slack in shock, and she stumbled slightly, catching herself against the auction block. She dared not look directly at the prince. keeping her eyes lowered as protocol demanded. But she could sense him approaching the platform with measured steps. The crowd parted before him like water, and even the auctioneer bowed so low he nearly toppled from his perch. The morning sun broke through the clouds at that moment, catching the gold threads in Prince Alaric's simple but elegant clothing. No longer hidden by his cloak, the square had fallen completely silent now, hundreds of eyes watching as the prince of the realm stood before a common auction block, where a plain baker's daughter waited to learn her fate. The marketplace fell silent as Prince Alaric's heavy purse landed at Richard's feet with a decisive thud. As the stunned crowd dispersed in whispers, the tall stranger in the plain traveling cloak turned to Meg, who stood frozen like a frightened deer. His gloved hand extended toward her with gentle courtesy. "Come, miss," he said softly, his refined accent at odds with his simple attire. "My carriage awaits?" Meg's trembling fingers hesitated before accepting his help. The warmth of his grip steadied her as she picked her way across the cobblestones. A fine black carriage stood waiting at the edge of the square, its matching pair of horses pawing quietly at the ground. The coachman, dressed in muted livery, opened the door with a respectful bow. "Please," the stranger gestured for her to enter first. Meg gathered her worn skirts and climbed inside, her heart thundering against her ribs. The plush velvet seats felt foreign after years of wooden stools and hard benches. Her rescuer settled across from her as the carriage lurched into motion. The first day passed in nervous silence as they rolled through familiar countryside that soon gave way to paths Meg had never seen. When dusk approached, they stopped at a coaching inn far grander than any she had known. A maid led her to her own chamber, complete with a feather bed and fresh linens. "There must be some mistake," Meg protested weakly. "No mistake, miss," the maid assured her. "His Highness was most specific about your comfort." Meg's knees went weak. His Highness? The next morning over breakfast, served in a private parlor, her mysterious benefactor confirmed what she had begun to suspect. "I am Prince Alaric," he said simply, buttering a slice of bread. "I travel in disguise to better understand the true nature of my people, both noble and common." Meg nearly dropped her teacup. "Your Highness, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing of my identity, if you please. And tell me instead about yourself, your family, your life before today." Over the next 3 days of travel, between stops at increasingly elegant coaching inns, Meg gradually shared her story. She told him of her father, a skilled baker whose honest bread had fed half the town. Of happy mornings dusted with flour, learning to shape loaves with careful hands. Of his death 5 years past, leaving her in the power of her stepbrother Richard. "He gambled away the bakery within a year," Meg said quietly, watching fields roll past the carriage window. "Then the house. Then finally he tried to sell me to pay his debts." Prince Alaric's jaw tightened. Such men deserve neither authority nor respect. "You showed great dignity today, Miss Halley." "I tried to remember what my father taught me," she whispered. "That true worth lies in how we treat others, not in what we own." "Your father was a wise man." On the fourth evening, as the swaying carriage lanterns cast dancing shadows, Meg caught her first glimpse of the capital city. Ancient stone walls rose against the darkening sky, and beyond them the royal palace thrust its towers toward the stars. Moonlight gleamed on gilded spires and marble battlements. It was more magnificent than any tale she had heard at her father's knee. Her heart seemed to rise and plummet all at once. This glittering world of nobility and privilege was as far from her simple life as earth from heaven. What place could a baker's daughter possibly find here? Yet when she glanced at Prince Alaric, his kind eyes studying her reaction, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. The carriage rolled onward through gathering darkness, toward those shining towers and whatever fate awaited her within their walls. The palace gates groaned open with a flourish of trumpets, their gilded surfaces catching the afternoon sun. Meg's heart thundered in her chest as Prince Alaric helped her down from the carriage. The courtyard before them teemed with richly dressed nobles, their jewels glinting like hungry eyes in the sunlight. Word of her arrival had clearly outpaced the carriage. The prince's market prize, a silk-clad lady whispered behind her fan, loud enough for Meg to hear. What an enormous creature. Obese country wench, another noble muttered. Has his highness lost his senses entirely? Meg kept her chin level, though her cheeks burned. The lessons in dignity she'd learned at her father's bakery served her now. Head high, shoulders straight, just as she'd stood when delivering bread to demanding customers. What folly is this? The words rippled through the crowd, passed from mouth to mouth like poison. Prince Alaric's hand remained steady at her elbow, guiding her forward. The servants they passed bowed deeply, though their curious glances followed her plain dress and round figure. Meg noticed how their faces showed kindness rather than noble's contempt. They at least seemed to understand what it meant to be judged by station rather than worth. A stern-faced footman approached, bowing stiffly. Your Highness, the Queen Dowager demands your immediate presence. Both of you are to attend her in the blue solar. Meg's legs trembled as they climbed the marble stairs. The blue solar proved to be a sun-filled chamber decorated in shades of azure and gold, where the Queen Dowager waited like winter personified. Her silver-streaked hair was arranged in elaborate coils, her gown rustling with disapproval as she rose. Alaric, she pronounced each syllable like ice breaking. Explain yourself. Mother, I have rescued an innocent from barbaric treatment. Prince Alaric stated firmly. Miss Halley will remain under my protection. The Queen's eyes raked over Meg with glacial disdain. A baker's daughter, I'm told. Common as dirt. She turned to her son. The council has already convened. Keep her, and they shall strip you of succession. Is this... Her lip curled as she regarded Meg. Worth your birthright? Meg's heart clenched. She couldn't be the cause of Prince Alaric losing his crown. But before she could speak, a commotion at the door interrupted them. Begging your pardon, your grace, a robust woman in a plain dress curtsied, balancing a basket of linens. The chamber needs freshening, and I brought the special lavender sheets you prefer. The Queen Dowager waved her hand dismissively. Later, Marta. But the laundress caught Meg's eye with a warm wink as she backed out, and Meg felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest after the Queen's devastating pronouncement. Prince Alaric was called away to an urgent council meeting. Meg found herself wandering the vast corridors, lost and alone, until a gentle voice called out, Miss Halley? An elderly gentleman with kind eyes and silver hair approached, leaning on a walking stick. I am Mr. Fenwick, formerly tutor to His Highness. Might I show you to your chambers? As they walked, Mr. Fenwick spoke softly at Pallas. Customs and history. His measured words helped calm her racing thoughts. Near the servant's wing, they encountered Marta again, who promptly took Meg's cold hands in her warm ones. Don't you fret, dearie, Marta said firmly. We'll help you find your feet here. The palace seems grand, but it's just walls and windows. Like anywhere else. Indeed, Mr. Fenwick agreed. And some of us remember that true nobility lies in character, not circumstance. That evening, in her small but clean chamber, Meg knelt beside her narrow bed. The single candle cast wavering shadows as she clasped her hands in prayer. Gratitude for Prince Alaric's kindness warred with terror at the hatred she'd faced. Queen's threat hung heavy in her mind. How could she stay, knowing she might cost him his throne? Yet the unexpected kindness of Marta and Mr. Fenwick gave her a glimmer of hope that perhaps not everyone in this glittering prison wished her ill. The candle guttered, making the shadows dance. Meg's tears fell silently as she struggled with the weight of being despised by an entire court, while treasuring the few small mercies she'd found in this bewildering new world. Dawn crept through the palace. Windows as Marta knocked softly on Meg's chamber door. The kindly laundress carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper, her weathered face bright with anticipation. Good morning, dear. I brought you something more fitting for palace life than that travel dress. Meg unwrapped the package to find a simple gown of dove gray wool, modest but well made. Though plain compared to the silk confections worn by noble ladies, it was the finest thing she had ever owned. Oh, Marta, it's beautiful, she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. Now, no tears, Marta said briskly, helping Meg dress. The kitchen staff starts early, and I thought you might like to see where the real work of the palace happens. Together they descended the servants' stairs, Meg gathering her new skirts carefully. The kitchen corridors buzzed with activity. Maids hurrying with linens, footmen carrying trays, and the rich smell of baking bread filling the air. It reminded Meg of home, of early mornings helping her father in his bakery, and her heart lifted Dot in a quiet corner of the lesser hall. Mr. Fenwick awaited them. The elderly tutor's eyes crinkled with warmth. Ah, Miss Holly, shall we begin your lessons in deportment? First position, he instructed, demonstrating. Feet just so back straight, but not rigid. Now, sink down smoothly while extending one foot behind. Meg attempted to follow his movements, wobbling slightly. Her first curtsy ended with her nearly losing her balance, and she couldn't help but laugh at herself. I fear I'm as graceful as a cart horse, Mr. Fenwick. Nonsense, he replied kindly. Your natural dignity, my dear. The rest is merely practice. They worked through the morning, Meg growing more confident with each attempt. During a rest, a cry of pain drew her attention. A young scullery maid had cut her hand while cleaning vegetables. Dot, without hesitation. Meg hurried to help. Here, let me see, she said gently, examining the wound. Drawing her own handkerchief from her pocket, she carefully cleaned and bound the cut. There now. Keep it clean and dry. The girl's eyes filled with grateful tears. Thank you, miss. You're so kind. As Meg continued through the kitchens, she paused to admire the fresh-baked loaves, cooling on wooden racks. These are beautiful, she told the cook honestly. The crust is perfect, just like my father used to achieve. He would have been impressed. The cook's stern face softened with pleasure. Was your father a baker then, miss? The best in our town, Meg replied, a touch of pride in her voice. He taught me everything I know about bread. Unknown to Meg, Prince Alaric observed these interactions from shadowed doorways and hidden galleries. He watched as servants began to smile when they saw her coming, how she remembered their names, and asked after their families. Her genuine warmth drew people to her like moths to a flame. Dot as evening approached. Alaric found an excuse to invite Meg to walk with him in the palace orchards. Apple and cherry trees were in full bloom, their petals drifting like snow in the gentle breeze. The setting sun painted the clouds in shades of rose and gold. You've won over half the palace in a single day, he remarked. Helping her step over a fallen branch, Meg shook her head modestly. I've done nothing special, Your Highness. Only tried to be useful where I could. That's precisely what makes you extraordinary, Alaric said softly. I have never known one so good-hearted. You see, people truly see them, regardless of their station. It's rare and precious, especially here at court. A blush crept up Meg's cheeks at his words, and she looked down at her hands. Her heart fluttered strangely in her chest as she realized that somewhere between his kindness in the marketplace and this moment under the falling blossoms, she had begun to fall in love with him, not with his title or his handsome face, but with the man who noticed kindness and valued it above all else. The weeks flowed past like a gentle stream, each day bringing small victories as Meg found her place within the palace walls. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting golden light across her chambers as Mistress Blackwood, the royal seamstress, adjusted the hem of a dove-gray gown. There now, miss, the seamstress murmured, pins held carefully between her lips. A proper lady-in-waiting needs proper attire. She smoothed the silk, her experienced hands ensuring every fold lay perfectly. Meg hardly recognized herself in the mirror. Gone were the worn cotton dresses of her past, replaced by garments that whispered elegance with every movement. When Sunday arrived, bright and clear, Alaric sent word that Meg should join the congregation. In the palace chapel, her heart fluttered as she made her way down the corridor, her new slippers silent on the polished marble. The chapel doors stood open, morning light streaming through stained glass windows. and painting rainbow patterns. On the stone floor as Meg entered, the familiar divide appeared. Nobles on the right, common folk on the left. The aristocrats' faces pinched with disdain, their fans fluttering like agitated birds as they whispered behind them. But from the common pews, warm smiles greeted her. An old woman blessed herself and nodded encouragingly. A merchant's wife patted the seat beside her with a motherly smile. "God's grace upon you, miss," whispered a baker's apprentice as Meg passed, his words carrying the scent of fresh bread that reminded her of home. "We've heard how kind you are to the servants." The service proceeded with familiar hymns and prayers, but it was afterward that something unexpected happened. As people filed out into the courtyard, a small group of children broke away from their parents and gathered around Meg. Their eyes were bright with curiosity and admiration. "Miss," a little girl with braided hair tugged at Meg's skirts, "is it true you know all the old songs? Cook says you sing while you help in the kitchens." Meg's cheeks flushed pink. "I do know a few. Please sing for us." Several voices chorused at once. "Please, miss." Looking around, Meg saw Alaric watching from the chapel steps, his eyes warm with encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she began to sing an old ballad about a nightingale who brought spring to a frozen kingdom. Her voice, though not trained in the classical style, carried pure and true across the courtyard. The children sat mesmerized, and gradually others stopped to listen. Even the palace guards, usually stoic and stern, softened their stance. One old soldier discreetly wiped his eyes, perhaps remembering his own mother's lullabies as the song ended. Alaric approached, his presence causing the crowd to part respectfully. "Walk with me in the garden, Lady Margaret," he said formally, though his eyes danced with private joy in the rose garden. Screened by fragrant blooms and careful hedges, Alaric took Meg's hands in his. "These past weeks," he began, his voice tender but firm, "I have watched you transform this palace with your kindness. The servants adore you. The children flock to you. Even the most hardened hearts cannot help but be moved by your genuine goodness." Meg's heart beat faster as he continued. "I knew when I first saw you in that marketplace that you were special. But I did not know then that I would come to love you as I do now." He squeezed her hands gently. "I wish to make you my wife, not from duty or pity, but because my heart has chosen you." Tears welled in Meg's eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. That evening at supper, Meg sat at her usual place, watching the candlelight dance across the silver and crystal. The flame seemed to mirror the hope flickering in her heart. Looking around at the grand dining hall, at Marta serving with a proud smile, at Mr. Fenwick nodding approvingly from his seat, and at Alaric's steady, loving gaze, Meg found the courage to voice the question that had lived in her heart since that first day. Might God truly mean for me to belong here? She whispered, half to herself, and half to the flickering candles before her. Thunder cracked across leaden skies as rain lashed against the palace windows. The afternoon had turned as dark as twilight, matching the storm that was about to break. Within the castle walls, through sheets of rain, royal couriers galloped into the courtyard, their horses' hooves splashing through puddles. Behind them rode a familiar figure that made Meg's blood run cold, her stepbrother, Richard. From her window, Meg watched him dismount, his fine clothes now mud-splattered from the journey. Even from this distance, she could see the smug smile playing across his face as he produced a leather document case from his saddlebag. Her hands trembled against the windowsill. "My lady," Marta's gentle voice came from behind her. "The Queen Dowager demands your presence in the great hall. At once." Meg's heart thundered in time with the storm. She smoothed her gray silk gown, one of her new ones, and lifted her chin. Whatever Richard planned, she would face it with dignity. The great hall echoed with angry voices as Meg entered. Richard stood before the assembled council, his documents spread across their ornate table. Prince Alaric's face was dark with fury as he faced down the gathered nobles. "These papers prove she remains my legal property," Richard declared, his voice carrying to the rafters. The sale was made under duress. I was surrounded by an angry mob. The transaction cannot stand. Meg's cheeks burned as nobles turned to stare at her. The Queen Dowager sat rigid on her carved chair, her face like stone. Furthermore, Richard continued with theatrical dismay. She was sold for far below her true worth. The law is clear. Such a transaction is void. You speak of her as if she were cattle. Prince Alaric's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. He stood tall, his shoulders squared. Lady Margaret is a freeborn woman of gentle birth. Richard's laugh was cruel. Gentle birth? A baker's get? Do not deceive yourself, your highness. She is worthless, fit only for scullery work at that. I do you a favor by reclaiming her. Meg forced herself to breathe slowly, though each word was a dagger to her heart. She had known such peace these past weeks, had dared to hope... But now Richard would drag her back to misery. The council members huddled together, pointing at various documents and whispering. Lord Chancellor Blackwood finally stepped forward, his expression grave. Your Highness, while we share your... displeasure. The law appears clear. Until this matter can be fully investigated, the woman must return to her legal guardian's custody. No! Prince Alaric's voice cracked like the thunder outside. I will not allow it. The Queen Dowager rose slowly to her feet. You have no choice. My son, the law must be observed, or what are we? If you truly care for the girl's reputation, you will not fight this. Let her return until matters are settled properly. Meg watched Alaric's shoulders sag slightly. He turned to her, his eyes full of anguish. My lady, I swear to you. Thank you, your highness, Meg whispered, dropping into a deep curtsy. You have shown me more kindness than I deserve. Her voice nearly broke, but she forced the words out. Richard's hand closed around her arm like an iron band. Come, sister dear. Time to go home. The nobles turned away, already dismissing her from their minds. Only Prince Alaric watched, his fists clenched helplessly at his sides. As Richard dragged her from the hall, Meg begged a moment to gather her things. In her small chamber, no longer hers now, she sank to her knees beside the bed. Her fingers found her mother's rosary, worn smooth by years of prayers. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like God's own drums of war. Tears fell freely now as she clutched the beads to her breast. Each drop of rain against the window seemed to mock. The dream she had dared to dream, of belonging here, of love, of happiness. Now Richard would sell her again to someone far worse than before. The thought sent fresh sobs racking through her body. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chamber in stark white. In that brief moment, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror, a plain, plump girl with red-rimmed eyes, no match for the glittering beauties of court. Perhaps Richard was right. Perhaps she truly was worthless. Thunder crashed again as darkness closed in around her, as heavy as the despair in her heart. The morning dawned gray and cheerless. Dew clung heavy to the castle gardens, and a chill mist wrapped around the stone towers like a funeral shroud. Inside the great council chamber, Prince Alaric stood before the assembled nobles, his shoulders straight but his heart breaking with each breath. The Queen Dowager sat upon her gilded chair, her face a mask of stern satisfaction. Around her, council members shuffled papers and whispered behind ringed hands. Richard Hall laked near a pillar, poorly concealing his triumphant smile. Your Highness, the Lord Chancellor intoned, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You understand why we are gathered? The matter of the common woman, Margaret Hawley, must be resolved. Alaric's fingers curled into fists at his sides. Through the tall windows, he could see the very orchard where just days ago he had walked, with Meg among the apple blossoms, where her gentle laugh had made his heart soar. I understand, he said, each word tasting of ashes. The Queen Dowager leaned forward. Then speak the word, my son. End this foolishness before it destroys everything. Your father built. Alaric closed his eyes briefly, remembering Meg's face, her quiet dignity, her kindness that had won over even the most hardened servants. But he also remembered the threats, not just to his crown, but to her reputation. If he fought this, they would drag her name through the mud until nothing remained of her honor. Double quotes, his voice caught. He cleared his throat and began again. I, Prince Alaric, hereby renounce all claim to Margaret Hawley. I acknowledge the prior claim of her guardian and release her to his custody. The words fell like stones into a deep well. From somewhere behind him he heard a small gasp. Meg had been brought to witness his betrayal. He dared not turn around, knowing his resolve would shatter if he saw her face. Very wise, Your Highness, the Lord Chancellor nodded. Guards, escort Mistress Hawley to the waiting carriage. The sound of boots on stone, the rustle of skirts. Alaric kept his eyes fixed on the far wall as Meg was led away. His nails bit into his palms until he felt warm drops of blood. Outside, the morning mist had begun to lift as Meg was guided into a plain black carriage. The windows were fitted with iron bars, a detail that made Richard's intentions clear. He had no intention of letting her escape again. As the carriage lurched forward, Meg pressed her forehead against the cool glass. The gardens where she had walked with Alaric blurred past, then the outer walls, then the city itself. With each turning of the wheels, her brief season of joy receded like a dream at dawn. Our Father, who art in heaven, she whispered, her breath fogging the window. Grant me strength to endure what comes. Her fingers found her rosary beads, warming them with desperate touches. Richard rode alongside the carriage, occasionally glancing in at his captive with undisguised glee. When they stopped to water the horses, he swaggered over to the carriage door. Well, sister dear, he sneered through the bars, it seems your little fairy tale has ended. But do not fret, I have already arranged a most profitable solution. A merchant from across the sea has offered 3 times what the prince paid. He has got exotic tastes. Meg said nothing, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The journey continued through the afternoon. With each mile, the palace grew smaller against the skyline, its proud towers diminishing, until they seemed no larger than the toys in a child's nursery. Meg pressed her hand against the glass, as if she could reach through it and grasp those fading spires. It cannot end so, she whispered, her words barely stirring the air inside the carriage. The palace disappeared entirely behind a hill, taking with it all her dreams of love and belonging. But deep in her heart, past the ache of loss and betrayal, a small flame of hope refused to die. She held onto it like a drowning woman clutching at a rope, letting its warmth sustain her as the carriage rolled onward into uncertainty. The attic chamber still smelled of yeast and flour, a ghost of her father's bakery below. Meg sat on the threadbare rug, her fine palace gowns now wrinkled from the journey and her confinement. Through the dusty window, she could see the overgrown garden where she had once played as a child, before Richard had turned their home into a den of gambling. And, DK, you'll stay here until the merchant arrives, Richard had sneered, turning the iron key. This time, I'll send you far enough that no prince can find you. But in this room of memories, Meg found strange comfort. Her father's presence lingered. In every corner, the worn prayer book on the bedside table, the sturdy oak furniture he had crafted himself, the faded paintings of her mother on the walls. As evening approached, she began to explore, touching each familiar item like a blind woman reading memories. Behind a loose panel near the chimney, her fingers found something new. A small chest, its wood smooth with age. Her hands trembled as she drew it out. Inside, yellowed papers rustled, sealed with wax bearing the royal crest. Meg's heart began to pound as she unfolded the first letter. To Master Thomas Hawley, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Your courage in the forest that day saved not just a lost traveler, but your king. The bandits would have surely taken my life had you not intervened. Letter after letter revealed a truth long hidden. Her father, the humble baker, had rescued the king from highwaymen years ago, before Meg was born. The king had sworn him to secrecy for security, but honored him with a private pension and promises of future aid. A soft knock interrupted her reading. Old Martha, who had served her family, since Meg was small, peered through a crack in the door. "Miss, I've brought you some bread, and I can take a message if you need." Meg's hand shook as she gathered the letters. "Martha, these must reach Prince Alaric. My father saved the king's life. Richard has no right to sell me. Please, help me." Martha's roomy eyes widened at the royal seal. Tucking the precious papers into her apron, she nodded. "I'll send my grandson. He's swift and knows the back roads to the palace." Through the long night, Meg paced her chamber, praying. She imagined the boy racing through darkness, the letters bouncing against his chest. In the palace, Alaric would be searching for a way to help her. She had to believe that dawn was breaking when horses' hooves thundered in the courtyard below. Meg heard Richard's angry shouts, then the clear, commanding voice she had feared she would never hear again. These letters, Alaric's voice rang out, prove that Meg Hale's father was a hero to the crown. The king himself confirms it. Your claims of ownership are not just false, they're treasonous. The council chamber fell silent as Alaric presented the letters. Nobles who had sneered at Meg now shifted uncomfortably, seeing their mistake. The Queen Dowager's face grew pale as she recognized her husband's seal and hand. Furthermore, Alaric continued, his voice steady with controlled anger. To sell a freeborn woman is against all laws of God and crown. Guards, seize this man. Richard's protest turned to whimpers as royal guards clasped him in irons. No, wait, I can explain. I didn't know, but his lies had finally run dry. As Richard was dragged away, Alaric was already mounting his horse. The same stallion that had carried him to the marketplace now galloped through the misty morning, bearing him back to Meg, this time not to rescue a stranger, but to reclaim the woman he loved. Behind him rode a contingent of royal guards, their cloaks streaming in the wind, their presence declaring to all that they came on official business. The truth had finally emerged from its long hiding place, and with it, justice would be served. The first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Prince Alaric's royal carriage thundered down the country road toward Richard Hale's manor. The wheels clattered against the cobblestones, matching the urgent beating of his heart. Behind him rode 24 of his finest soldiers, their armor gleaming in the early morning light. The manor house came into view, its weathered stones and crumbling facade, a far cry from its former glory. Alaric didn't wait for the carriage to fully stop before leaping out, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. Where is she? He demanded of the startled servants who had gathered at the commotion. A trembling maid pointed toward the upper floor. The attic chambers, your highness. Alaric took the stairs 2 at a time, his soldiers close behind. The wooden steps creaked under their weight as they climbed to the highest floor. There, before a heavy oak door, stood Richard Hale, trying to maintain his usual arrogant sneer despite his obvious fear. Stand aside, Alaric commanded, his voice ringing with authority. You have no right, Richard began, but 2 soldiers quickly seized him by the arms. Alaric threw open the door, and his heart nearly stopped at what he saw. Meg knelt on the dusty floor, her face pale and drawn, but still bearing that quiet dignity he had come to love so deeply. When she looked up and saw him standing there, her eyes went wide with disbelief. My prince? She whispered, swaying slightly as if she might faint. Surely I am dreaming. Alaric crossed the room in 3 long strides and reached down to her. No dream, my love. Stand up. You need never kneel again. His strong hands gripped her shoulders, lifting her gently to her feet. Meg trembled like a leaf in his embrace, her eyes filling with tears of joy and wonder. Alaric turned to face the gathered crowd of servants and soldiers, his voice carrying clear and strong through the chamber. Listen, well, all of you. This woman is mine by love and by right. Her father saved the king's life, and the crown's debt to her family stands unpaid until now. From below came the sounds of commotion as villagers began gathering, drawn by the presence of royal guards. They pressed into the manor's courtyard, craning their necks to see what was happening. Richard struggled against disholding him, his face twisted with rage. You cannot do this. She is my property. Silence, Alaric thundered. Your crimes end today. Take him away. The soldiers dragged Richard down the stairs, his curses echoing through the house. As they emerged into the courtyard, the villagers who had suffered under Richard's cruelty for years began to cheer. Some threw rotten vegetables as he was forced into a prison wagon, the iron chains clinking as they were secured. Inside the attic chamber, Meg clung to Alaric, her fingers gripping the fine fabric of his coat as if afraid he might disappear. Is it truly over? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. I swear to you, my heart, we shall never be parted in. Not by law, not by custom, not by any power in this realm. He helped her gather the few belongings she wished to keep: her father's prayer book, a small wooden cross, the letters that had saved her. Then, with his arm protectively around her waist, he led her down through the manor house, where she had known so much suffering. The morning sun had fully risen as they emerged into the courtyard. Villagers bowed and curtsied, calling out blessings. Children scattered flower petals in their path. Alaric helped Meg into his carriage, then joined her inside Dot as the driver called to the horses and the carriage began to move. Meg and Alaric sat close together, their fingers intertwined. Through the window, they watched the sunrise painting the rolling hills in brilliant golds and pinks. Neither spoke, they didn't need to. Their clasped hands said everything about the joy and promise that lay ahead. The cathedral bells rang. Out across the city, their joyous peals echoing through narrow streets and grand boulevards alike. Dawn's golden light streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across marble floors where rose petals already lay scattered. The morning air hummed with excitement as common folk gathered on the cathedral steps, straining for a glimpse of their beloved prince and his chosen bride. Inside the cathedral's preparation chamber, Meg stood before a gilded mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The ivory silk gown, adorned with delicate pearls and flowing like water, transformed her usually plain figure into something graceful. Marta, her faithful friend from the laundry, tucked a last white flower into her carefully arranged hair. There. Now, my lady, Marta whispered, squeezing Meg's trembling hands. You look every inch a princess. The massive cathedral doors swung open, and the assembled crowd drew a collective breath. Children from the village, dressed in their Sunday best, began scattering rose petals along the aisle. Their small faces beamed with pride at their important task, and Meg felt tears welling in her eyes at their innocent joy dot as she took her first step down the aisle. The choir's voices soared to the vaulted ceiling. Commoners packed the back of the church and spilled out onto the steps beyond, their presence a warm reminder of the people who had supported her journey. Noble families sat stiffly in the front pews, their expressions varying from resigned acceptance to lingering disdain. But Meg held her head high. At the altar stood Prince Alaric, resplendent in his formal military uniform, his eyes shining with love as he watched her approach. Behind him, the elderly archbishop smiled kindly, his golden vestments gleaming in the morning light. When Meg reached Alaric's side, he took her hand in his, and she saw that his fingers trembled as much as hers. They turned to face the archbishop together as he began the ancient ceremony, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral. The moment Alaric drew out the royal signet ring, a tangible shift moved through the assembled crowd. This was no mere wedding band, but a symbol of true royal authority. As he slipped it onto Meg's finger, his voice rang out strong and clear. With this ring, I thee wed, and share my crown. The cathedral erupted in thunderous cheers, the sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations. Common folk threw their caps in the air, and even some of the nobles found themselves caught up in the moment's joy, clapping despite themselves. Most surprising of all was the Queen Dowager. As the newly married couple turned to face their people, she rose from her seat, her regal bearing commanding immediate silence. Her face, usually stern with tradition and protocol, had softened noticeably. Perhaps, she announced, her voice Carrying to every corner of the cathedral, the kingdom needs a heart such as hers. She stepped forward to place a maternal kiss on Meg's cheek, and fresh cheers erupted throughout the cathedral. The celebration lasted well into the night, with feasting and dancing that brought together all classes of society. Nobles found themselves joining country dances with merchants, while servants shared wine with knights. Through it all, Meg and Alaric moved among their people, accepting congratulations and blessings from all Dot as the evening drew to a close. They stood together on the palace balcony, watching thousands of paper lanterns float into the starlit sky. Each light represented a prayer, a wish, a hope for their future together. The sight brought fresh tears to Meg's eyes. Alaric drew her close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "From the moment I saw you, you were always my princess." Meg smiled, squeezing his hand as she watched the lanterns rise higher. Heart finally, truly at peace. Below them, the city celebrated, while above, the stars twinkled their blessing on a love that had overcome every obstacle to unite two hearts as one Dot. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here where love speaks softly and stays.